911, what is your emergency? You need to get off the radio, Julius.
She steps into the courtroom, calm and composed, hands clasped tightly. Minutes later, she started crying. Some see guilt, others see fear. But behind those tears lies a story of trust twisted into betrayal inside a home meant to protect, not destroy. Her name is Sabrina Zunich, 16 years old, accused of killing the woman who took her in, Lisa Canful. A case that shook even seasoned detectives, not for its brutality, but for its heartbreaking origin. This wasn't sudden rage. It was built slowly, word by word, by someone she thought she could trust. Before we go further, take a moment. A mother lost her life. A teenager lost her future. If stories like this remind you how fragile truth can be, subscribe now. Help us make sure their voices and their lessons are never forgotten. On November 16, 2012, at 12:47 a.m., a 911 call shattered the silence in Willoughby Hills, Ohio. Moments later, police found a woman dead and a teenage girl standing over her with trembling hands. It should have been a simple question of why, but the truth that followed was anything but simple. Because when Sabrina took the stand, her words nearly set her free, until one video played and every lie unraveled. This is the story of Sabrina Zunich, the teen who lied in court, ready to walk free, until the video played. After the courtroom tears and the haunting sight of a 16-year-old accused of murder, we turn back the clock. Before the flashing lights, before the headlines. To understand what truly happened inside that house, you have to begin with the people who opened its doors. In Lake County, Ohio, the Canful family was known for kindness that felt rare. They were the ones you called when a child needed a place to stay, when no one else would take that call. Neighbors remember their tidy yard, Lisa waving from the porch as she packed lunch bags for the kids she loved as her own. On summer mornings, hymns drifted from their car as they headed to church. They lived what most would call an ordinary good life. Steady jobs, a warm home, 2 foster children who adored them. Everyone saw them as the kind of family that healed others. No one ever imagined that same house would later hold such unthinkable pain. Lisa Canful was a pillar in her community. A middle school teacher with a patient smile, she believed discipline meant understanding, not punishment. Her colleagues described her as dependable, gentle but firm, the kind of woman who kept her promises. When she began fostering, she wanted to give troubled kids the home she never had. A place where arguments ended in hugs and no one felt disposable. Her friends called her the quiet hero of Lake County, the woman who stayed late to help, who always picked up extra shifts when a parent couldn't. People said Lisa's heart was too big for her own good, but she took pride in proving that love could fix what life had broken. Her husband, Kevin Canful, complimented her in every public way. Outgoing where she was calm, he volunteered to coach local youth basketball, laughing easily, full of energy. To the world, Kevin was the perfect partner, supportive, funny, devoted. He'd tell stories of how he and Lisa had once stayed up all night decorating their foster son's room just to make him smile by morning. Parents admired him, kids felt comfortable around him. He had that magnetic charm that people trusted without thought. And when social workers came calling with another placement, Kevin never hesitated. If Lisa's on board, so am I. They seemed unbreakable, the kind of couple that made the system work. In late 2011, when Sabrina Zunich, a quiet 15-year-old from a nearby youth center, entered their lives, the Canfuls did what they always did. They made space. Sabrina carried the shadows of her upbringing on her shoulders. Reports described a childhood marked by neglect, moving between relatives and shelters. Others mentioned she was bright, creative, hungry for belonging. The night she arrived, Lisa made spaghetti, her go-to welcome meal, while Kevin teased her about taking the biggest slice of garlic bread. For the first time in months, Sabrina laughed at a dinner table. That's the moment everyone remembered, the night she looked like a regular teenager again. Lisa worked tirelessly to guide her. Teachers noticed Sabrina's grades improve, and weekend trips with the family became the norm. They went apple picking that fall. Photos show her smiling wide. Wrapped in a red scarf Lisa knitted herself. For a while, it seemed every scar from Sabrina's past was beginning to fade. But within those same walls, tiny fractures were forming, ones too subtle for anyone to notice. It began with compliments, Kevin telling Sabrina she was mature for her age, that she reminded him of himself back in high school. Lisa brushed it off as encouragement. After all, he often joked that everyone needed confidence. Still, the tone lingered just a little longer than it should have, and his laughter, once easy and open, seemed to soften only when directed at their foster daughter. As months passed, the balance in the Canfield household shifted. Lisa's colleagues say she started showing up to work exhausted, distracted, smiling less. At dinner, she'd excuse herself early to finish lesson plans, leaving Kevin and Sabrina talking in the kitchen. When friends asked about it, Lisa replied that Kevin was simply helping Sabrina adjust, that it was better for her to have a male figure to look up to. Yet inside her own journal, Lisa confessed feeling a distance she couldn't quite name. Small things, the way Kevin paid attention when Sabrina spoke, or how Sabrina seemed nervous around him when anyone else was near, gnawed at her quiet patience. Still, the Canfield home carried on with the same charm everyone admired. On the surface, they remained the dependable foster family Lake County trusted, the kind that turned damaged pasts into fresh starts. To outsiders, Lisa and Kevin were steady role models. Sabrina, the success story. But under the calm surface, something about the rhythm of that house had changed. Within its walls, there was affection. Too much of it in one direction, and not nearly enough in the other. In early 2012, Lisa wrote just one entry that hinted anything was wrong. The neat lines of her handwriting trembled slightly, as if written after wiping tears away. "Sometimes Kevin talks to her more than me," she wrote. A single sentence that said far more than she ever would allowed. She set the pen down, closed the journal, and turned off the light, unaware that those quiet words would one day become the only clue of what she already sensed but couldn't bear to face. The entry in Lisa's journal would be the last calm moment before everything began to change. Beneath the same roof where dinners were shared and chores were divided, a different rhythm was quietly taking shape, one that only two people seemed to recognize. Kevin Canfield, now the ever-helpful father figure, started spending more time with Sabrina, in ways that felt natural on the surface and entirely harmless to anyone watching. But behind the jokes and fatherly advice, a dark intention was beginning to take root. A plan that would confuse love with loyalty and leave a teenager unable to know the difference. It began with small gestures. A piece of candy slipped into her backpack after school. A new phone case, just because she deserved something nice. Compliments that made her blush mixed with words that felt protective, even affectionate. Everything Lisa had once loved about Kevin now redirected toward the girl they were supposed to help. He told her she was special, that she was stronger than people gave her credit for, that she reminded him of himself at her age. To a 16-year-old searching for approval, those tiny drops of attention became everything. Sabrina had spent her youth learning to survive on fragments. Compliments from teachers, short bursts of kindness from strangers who didn't stay long. So when Kevin gave her his time, his listening ear, she mistook it for the love she'd always been promised but never kept. Grooming, investigators later explained, was never loud or obvious. It was quiet, repetitive, expertly disguised as care. Isolation, dependency, control. Each stage sets the victim apart, removes one support, gives them another disguised as safety. Kevin understood that better than most. He began volunteering to take Sabrina to appointments Lisa couldn't attend. He'd keep her later than expected, saying they were stuck in traffic or stopped for dinner. At home, Lisa questioned him lightly. He'd laugh, pull her into a hug, and tell her she was worrying too much. He was confident now, patient, weaving this new attachment thread by thread. Late nights became routine. He'd knock on Sabrina's door, telling her he just wanted to check in, that he couldn't sleep knowing she was upset over school or friends. These talks lasted longer each time, stretching into early morning hours under the justification of guidance and support. When she cried about feeling unwanted by her birth parents, he brushed the tears from her cheek with a gentleness that confused mercy for something else. Then came the whispers, words carefully calculated, quietly devastating. You deserve better. Someone who understands you. Someone who wouldn't give you up. The line between father figure and accomplice began to vanish, replaced by an unhealthy bond that only he controlled. He wasn't seducing her. He was programming her. Every compliment, every apology, every half-smile was a code designed to confuse affection with obedience. As months passed, Lisa watched from a distance she couldn't quantify. The laughter between Kevin and Sabrina no longer sounded like parental warmth. It was private, quiet, heavy with something she couldn't name. He started praising Sabrina more in front of others, always sliding a sideways glance to Lisa afterward as if daring her to contradict him. When she did, he'd wave it off. She needs encouragement, he'd say. But late at night, when she sat alone grading papers, Lisa would hear faint murmurs from the hallway, his voice low and reassuring, hers nervous but responsive. In these moments, she began to feel like a guest in her own marriage, shut out of something she should have understood but didn't want to believe. For Sabrina, confusion took root. Kevin had slowly rewritten the definition of family for her. He told her Lisa didn't truly care, that she only wanted to fix broken children to feel good about herself. He said Lisa was controlling, jealous, ungrateful for his loyalty. To a girl still struggling with trust, the manipulation worked. She began to doubt the only woman who ever fought for her stability. It was an emotional triangle built entirely on deceit, where Kevin's charm disguised cruelty so effectively even the people closest to him missed the signs. When Sabrina confided in a classmate one afternoon, hinting that her foster father acted weird sometimes, maybe liked her too much, the friend shrugged it off as an exaggeration or teenage confusion. That moment, the last chance for anyone to sound an alarm, slipped away forever. By the summer of 2012, the pattern was complete. Kevin had gained exactly what he wanted, control through fear disguised as affection. Lisa was quieter now, emotionally exhausted, still writing short diary notes no one would see until much later. Sabrina was lost under the illusion of love, feeling chosen all while being used as a weapon. Kevin wore the mask of the perfect father to everyone outside the home. The dependable coach, neighbor, husband. Inside, that same man was rehearsing lies, shaping stories that would later be told as truth. The more Kevin convinced Sabrina that Lisa stood between them, the clearer his path became. His praise turned into persuasion. His affection became instruction. She was told to trust him completely, that together they could fix everything and finally live in peace. Sabrina, desperate for that promise, never saw that she was being trained, emotionally conditioned, step by step, to do something she could never undo. One evening in August 2012, while Lisa prepared lesson plans in the living room, Kevin sat quietly in the kitchen, a blank document open on the laptop before him. He wasn't grading, wasn't browsing headlines. He was calculating. The faint glow of the screen reflected his face as he typed the first few lines of what would become his new safety net. Updated insurance policies, property files, contacts to call, just in case. He hesitated, tapping the pen against the desk. Then he leaned toward the lamp, slid a single folder under its light, and studied it carefully. The paper shimmered faintly under the bulb. Lisa's name printed bold across the top, and in that still room, Kevin whispered 3 chilling words, "Soon, it's done." When Kevin whispered, "Soon, it's done," the clock inside that house started ticking in ways that no one could hear. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, precise, cold. What began as emotional control was now evolving into calculation. He wasn't planning a fight. He was planning freedom at someone else's expense. By October 2012, Kevin had moved from words to structure, building what investigators later called a blueprint for murder. Each movement, each excuse, each casual smile covered something deliberate. He wasn't going to kill Lisa with his own hands. He planned to use Sabrina's. The clock kept ticking. He began laying the groundwork piece by piece, weaving routine into an alibi. He adjusted his work schedule meticulously, picking shifts that aligned perfectly with the nights he wanted accounted for. He created text logs that looked innocent, telling coworkers he'd be busy late, dropping digital breadcrumbs that would mark him miles away when everything happened. He started saving receipts from gas stations he never visited and messages timestamped at times he was already at home. Investigators later said it was chilling, the way he made lies look ordinary. He even practiced small details, leaving his phone in his office drawer during breaks so cell towers would record him safely at work later that night. He was building a cage for Lisa's truth, and the locks were made of deception. Sabrina, meanwhile, was sinking deeper into what she believed was loyalty. Kevin convinced her that Lisa no longer wanted her in the house, repeating small phrases designed to corrode her faith in the woman who had nurtured her. "She's done with you," he'd say softly. "She told me she's tired of your behavior. She's planning to send you back." Those words hit her hardest because they played on her deepest fear, abandonment. Kevin wrapped every manipulation in the warmth of affection, mixing guilt with comfort until Sabrina couldn't separate one from the other. He would tell her that he loved Lisa, but that love was gone. That Lisa wasn't the woman she once was, and that sometimes good people had to make hard decisions. The idea wasn't to make Sabrina hate Lisa, it was to make her fix things for him. As he worked on his plan, Lisa was unknowingly preparing for the holidays. Early November brought cold evenings and the hum of electric heaters, the house filled with cinnamon and the smell of candles lit against the chill. She was decorating calm spaces, gently arranging family photos on the mantel, completely unaware that her husband was clearing his computer browser of searches that would later make detectives' stomachs turn. Among his erased history were keywords of precision, insurance policies, inheritance protocols, missing spouse investigations. He had convinced Sabrina that money was tight, that Lisa had burdened them both with endless bills and resentment. But what he never said aloud was that Lisa's life insurance policy, updated 2 months prior, now listed him as the sole beneficiary. That week, Sabrina stopped calling Lisa Mom. The change came naturally, unnoticed at first, until one dinner when Lisa asked if everything was all right. Kevin cut in, charming as ever, explaining that teenagers go through moods. Lisa smiled faintly, a little uneasy, but said nothing more. Afterward, Kevin complimented Sabrina for staying strong, telling her that one day Lisa would regret what she'd done to them. She wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, because every time doubt surfaced, he renewed his promise. "When this is over, it'll be just you and me." In the final days leading to November 16th, Kevin's words grew more direct. He started talking about endings, about new beginnings, about letting go of people who don't care about you. He painted himself as a victim, Lisa as the enemy, and Sabrina as the savior. He reminded her of every fight she'd ever had with Lisa, rewriting those memories until they felt intentional, proof that Lisa wanted her gone. He tethered Sabrina's self-worth to the impossible idea that love demanded sacrifice. And when she faltered, when fear cracked through her trance, Kevin used tears of his own. He'd shake his head, say he couldn't keep living like this, that sometimes he wished he could disappear. Then he'd look at her and whisper, "You're the only one who really sees me." The night before the murder was quiet in a way that almost felt unnatural. November 15th, 2012, the home was still, cold rain tapping against the windows. Lisa sat at the dining table grading papers, a mug of tea beside her, the sound of the clock's second hand soft and steady in the background. Upstairs, Kevin and Sabrina spoke in whispers, every word shaping the moment to come. The family dog paced the hallway, whining occasionally, ears twitching toward the sound of hushed conversation. At 11:56 p.m., Kevin stood in the doorway of Sabrina's room, placing a hand on her shoulder, his voice low enough for only her to hear. He told her that Lisa planned to call the agency again in the morning, that if she left now, she'd lose everything, him included. He said there was only one way to make it stop, and that he'd take care of the rest. Then, just before he left the room, he kissed her forehead and whispered, Remember what we talked about. Downstairs, Lisa had finally closed her notebook and leaned back in her chair, rubbing her tired eyes. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, its steady rhythm echoing through the quiet house. In Kevin's pocket, his phone lay face up, preloaded with timed messages to coworkers, ensuring that when morning came, nobody would question where he'd been. He lingered in the garage, pacing once, twice, nodding to himself. Everything was aligned, the schedule, the texts, the plan. And as the minute hand touched 12 a.m., a strange stillness filled the air. Upstairs, a door creaked open. The clock ticked louder now, each second marking the last moments of the life Lisa Canfield thought she understood. Because by midnight, every person in that house would belong to a different world entirely. Midnight on November 16, 2012, came quietly to Willoughby Hills, Ohio. The rain had softened into drizzle, the neighborhood asleep, unaware of the storm rising inside one house on Stratford Place. Inside the Canfield home, the only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. 5 seconds, 10, then 20, steady, unhurried, unaware it was keeping time for a murder. The air felt thick, the kind of silence that presses against your chest, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Upstairs, a teenager sat on the edge of her bed, wide-eyed, replaying Kevin's words in her mind, each one more poisonous than the last. Downstairs, Lisa lay on the couch with an open book, half reading, half drifting, blissfully unaware that those footsteps above her weren't restless pacing. They were preparation. The moments that followed would later be reconstructed by detectives from evidence, police body cams, and the unfiltered terror captured in a 911 call at 12:47 a.m. "My sister's stabbing her. Please hurry," cried 13-year-old Megan Canfield, her voice raw, trembling, desperate. In those seconds, time fractured. The audio crackled with panic. A dog barking, glass shattering, footsteps, then the unmistakable sound of fear tearing through a child's throat. And then, just as quickly as it began, everything fell into silence. Officers described it later, not as confusion or chaos, but as eerily calm. The house wasn't the scene of frenzied violence one might expect from a brutal attack. It was too clean, too quiet, too certain. Every detail felt rehearsed. When first responders arrived, the door stood ajar, lights still on. Lisa lay motionless on the living room carpet, her body bearing the marks of more than 100 stab wounds. Yet the placement of each cut suggested control, not rage. There were no overturned chairs, no broken lamps, no signs of struggle beyond the assault itself. A knife rested beside Sabrina's trembling hand, her stare vacant, her lips whispering in disbelief. "I don't remember." The officers exchanged looks. They had seen teenagers act out in panic, but never like this. Sabrina didn't run. She didn't fight. She stood there waiting, almost as though she believed herself to be caught in someone else's story. The dog was still barking when paramedics entered, pacing by Lisa's side, refusing to leave her body. Megan, shaking in her pajamas, clung to a paramedic's sleeve, repeatedly muttering her sister's name, unable to understand how the same girl who helped her with homework could do something so impossible. The detectives who walked that night's floors still recall the chill of that room, not because of the weather, but because the scene didn't feel impulsive. It felt planned. One investigator would later say, "No rage pattern, no wild movements. It was surgical." Each piece told them this was not a teenager's decision born in anger. It was something designed. Across town, at 12:55 a.m., the employee records from Kevin Canfield's workplace logged his swipe-in time. Confirmation that he was at work, right where he said he'd be. He recorded tasks, made small talk with colleagues, even joked about weekend plans. Then, just minutes later, his phone vibrated with a message to Sabrina. "Everything okay?" The timestamp was 12:58 a.m. Subtle reassurance to himself that the plan was unfolding. Little did he know that simple text would later become one of the most damning pieces of evidence in the case, proof that distance on paper doesn't erase intent. Detectives would work through the dark hours, marking DNA samples on the kitchen floor, pulling fingerprints, comparing timestamps. What they found defied logic. Lisa's blood patterns didn't match the chaos of a panicked attack. They showed structure, direction, an arm guided by purpose rather than fury. Behavior analysts studied photos from the scene and concluded that whoever committed the act didn't lose control. They followed through. A crime of passion burns fast and wild. This one was cold and consistent. And yet, standing over the body, Sabrina looked shattered, as though she only truly woke after it was already done. As dawn crept through the blinds, the neighborhood began to stir. Neighbors gathered in disbelief under umbrellas, whispering prayers, staring at police tape drawn across a home once filled with laughter. Inside, the investigation deepened. Officers noted the heavy scent of bleach near the sink, traces of recently cleaned surfaces, computer histories wiped. They began connecting dots between the earlier days, Kevin's sudden interest in insurance forms, the subtle shift in Sabrina's behavior, phone records showing constant, private calls between them. The night that began as a nightmare for one family was starting to unfold as manipulation that had been set in motion long before. By 6 a.m., Kevin stood in the break room at work sipping black coffee, acting just concerned enough, playing the confused husband still unaware of the tragedy that had happened miles away. Co-workers remembered how quickly he shifted from laughter to tears when police arrived hours later to inform him that his wife was dead. He collapsed into the officer's arms, saying Sabrina must have lost her mind. But his grief seemed timed, deliberate, a performance rehearsed long before it was needed. When they asked if he knew of any tension at home, he shook his head and claimed everything was fine. Too fine. As night turned to morning, the truth was still half buried under fear, guilt, and deception. There were too many questions, too many odd details that didn't match the first impression of a teenage rage crime. Yet, for now, the case looked simple. A young girl kills her foster mother. Kevin's name wasn't written anywhere near the knife, and his alibi was tight. But one detective, flipping through early cell tower logs later that afternoon, noticed something small, something that didn't fit at all. Kevin Canfield's phone pinged off a tower less than a mile from his home, 20 minutes before the 911 call. A single data point that would break open everything he built. The perfect alibi was already beginning to crumble. The morning after Lisa's death, the world inside that house remained frozen in disbelief. Yet outside its walls, the story was already being rewritten. News outlets painted the headline in bold: "Teen foster daughter charged in brutal murder." The neighbors shook their heads, the public gasped, and by sunrise, people across Ohio were calling it a senseless act of teenage rage. But as Sabrina Zunich sat in a gray interrogation room inside the Lake County Jail, her hands cuffed and her eyes swollen from tears, something about the way she drifted between guilt and confusion didn't fit that headline. In one breath, she insisted she loved Lisa, sobbing that she didn't know why she'd hurt her. In the next, she whispered something more startling: that Kevin had told her Lisa wanted her gone, that he'd promised to protect her no matter what happened. Investigators exchanged glances, uncertain if this was delusion, manipulation, or the first glimpse of a buried truth. The first week inside the cell block was chaos for Sabrina. Some days, she sat silent for hours, staring at the floor. Other days, she broke down, repeating the same line: "He told me it was the only way." At 16, she looked too young to grasp the full weight of the charges against her. Officers watching through security monitors described her alternating between denial and admission, as if she couldn't decide which reality to believe. Each interview session deepened the mystery. This wasn't a hardened killer rehearsing lies. It was a frightened girl still seeking approval from the man who destroyed her life. While detectives pulled threads from her story, they began to search where most monsters hide: the messages Kevin thought he had erased. Meanwhile, Kevin Canfield stepped into the public spotlight like a man seemingly crushed by tragedy. Within days of the murder, he sat down for an interview with a local news station. The setting looked familiar: the family living room, the same walls where Lisa once hung photographs of foster children who had come and gone. Wearing a dark jacket and sorrowful expression, Kevin spoke softly into the camera. "We just want answers," he said, his voice trembling. "Lisa was the heart of our family. Sabrina's been through enough pain already. I don't understand how this happened." His performance was meticulous, emotional enough to appear human, calm enough to invoke trust. The community responded exactly as he wanted. Sympathy poured in. Viewers posted messages online calling him a devoted husband faced with betrayal. Few questioned that the man grieving on TV was the same one who had set every piece in motion. Behind the scenes, however, investigators were connecting details that didn't match his story. His phone's GPS record from the night of the murder was the first red flag. But there were others. Digital trails Kevin had carefully tried to erase but failed to bury completely. With warrants now in hand, detectives combed through email backups, deleted texts, and cloud conversation logs between him and Sabrina. It started out innocently, messages filled with parental advice, reminders about chores, and questions about school. Then slowly the tone changed. Encouragement became flattery. Flattery turned into intimacy. And soon, each exchange carried a charge that went far beyond fatherly affection. He told her she was his reason for living, that they were misunderstood, that Lisa didn't deserve either of them. He instructed her when to message him, what to delete, what to say if Lisa asked why they were close. Every "I love you" was followed by direction, every promise tied to obedience. When prosecutors later dissected those digital conversations, the picture came sharply into focus. This wasn't a spontaneous relationship between two damaged people. It was control disguised as dependence. The assistant county prosecutor would summarize it best: every "I love you" came with an instruction. The manipulation was stunning in its precision. It had crafted a child into a weapon and destroyed a family's foundation without a sound. The deeper investigators went, the more they realized how alone Lisa truly had been in those final months, surrounded by two people who smiled in her face while twisting reality behind her back. Back at the jail, Sabrina's voice trembled through a monitored phone call when Kevin reached out. In a calm tone, he told her to stay strong, to remember what they agreed on, and promised her that everything would be okay once he sorted things out. Her eyes lit up when she heard him, the same way they had when he first said she mattered. It was control still working even from afar. Yet, as investigators listened, transcribing each word, they could hear cracks starting to form. Between sobs, Sabrina told him she missed Lisa. The pause on the other end was chillingly long. Then, Kevin's voice came back, colder than before, instructing her never to say her foster mother's name again. While the world pitted Kevin, law enforcement knew the mask was slipping. They held back from arresting him too soon, watching as he continued his public tour of grief, arranging candlelight vigils, thanking reporters for prayers. It was theater, all of it, and yet the performance worked. Viewers rallied behind him, convinced he was another victim caught in tragedy. The only ones seeing through it were the people rebuilding the timeline of texts, money transfers, and deleted photos, each one a quiet confession of his guilt. That winter, as investigators prepared their case, they found an old diary tucked away in one of Lisa's nightstand drawers. Her words were dated September 2012, scrawled in neat cursive, maybe written after another of those tense evenings. She wrote one line, brief and weary: "Sometimes Kevin talks to her more than me." That single sentence, simple, quiet, almost apologetic, carried a weight that could crush anyone who understood what followed. That same night, her diary words played softly in the evidence room as investigators reviewed Kevin's taped TV interview. His practiced tears, his trembling voice, his face cast in sympathy. The contrast was devastating. In the glow of the monitor, Lisa's faint words seemed to echo through the speakers. "He talks to her more than me." Now they sounded less like worry and more like prophecy. And for the first time, Kevin Canfill's perfect facade began to crack. By the time June 2014 arrived, the small courtroom in Lake County, Ohio, felt charged with something heavier than expectation. It pulsed with years of pain waiting to surface. Reporters filled every seat, pens ready, lenses aimed. On one side sat Sabrina Zunich, no longer the trembling 16-year-old from that night, but still frail, her eyes dulled by months in juvenile detention. Across from her, dressed neatly in a dark suit, sat Kevin Canfield, wearing the same sympathetic expression that once fooled a nation. He kept his shoulders straight, a picture of composure, glancing occasionally toward Sabrina as if she were still the misguided child he could control with silence and memory. But the air between them had changed. The man who'd built himself as teacher, protector, husband, now faced the consequence of every whispered command, every digital trace he failed to erase. And for the first time, the careful mask he'd worn began to slip under the weight of truth. The defense leaned hard on appearance. Kevin's lawyers painted him as a man broken by betrayal, claiming Sabrina acted alone in jealousy and rage. They called her unstable, emotionally erratic, desperate for attention. To prove it, they played recordings of her early confessions, highlighting each time she contradicted herself in tears. The prosecution, however, approached methodically, their voices steady but sharp. They described a psychological trap set by an older man who exploited trust, who constructed an entire crime through manipulation rather than violence. The tension in the room thickened with each exchange. Even the judge, known for calm restraint, watched intently as the story of parental kindness twisted into corruption in front of him. When Sabrina finally took the stand, the room fell into a hush. Her hands shook as she placed them on the rail, her voice soft but clear. She recounted the final week before the murder, the way Kevin had made her believe Lisa despised her, how his late-night words blurred her sense of right and wrong. Throughout her testimony, she kept her gaze fixed forward, until the door creaked open and Kevin was escorted back inside. The sound of his footsteps made her flinch. Her breath hitched slightly, almost imperceptible, but enough for everyone watching to feel it. Those few seconds captured more than an emotional reaction, it was recognition. The look shared between them told the entire story. One person remembering lies, the other remembering control. The prosecutor approached slowly, calm as he asked his next question. Sabrina, did Kevin ever tell you what would happen that night? Her lips trembled, hesitation heavy in her silence. Then faintly she nodded. He just said, it was the only way we could be together. A murmur spread through the crowd, voices mixing disbelief and sorrow. For a moment, Kevin appeared stone still, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the table in front of him. But what came next would shred that calm beyond repair. The prosecutor glanced at the judge, a small motion of confirmation. A screen lit up. The courtroom dimmed. What appeared at first was gray static, then the faint hum of recorded jail audio. Kevin's voice surfaced, low and composed, from a call made to Sabrina shortly after her arrest. Just remember what we said, he told her. Stick to it. Don't change a word. You hear me? Then, a second recording, another day, another call. His tone sharpened. Say you panicked. That's all they need to hear. The jurors shifted. One woman's hand covered her mouth. The whispers in the gallery faded into complete silence. The defense tried to object, but the objection was drowned under the raw sound of Kevin's own manipulation echoing through the speakers. As the playback continued, the video evidence followed, security camera footage from outside the jail, showing Kevin pacing near the visitor entrance the same week he insisted he was done speaking to Sabrina. Transcripts scrolled across the monitor, line after line of messages where control disguised itself as comfort. Each one stripped away a layer of his innocence. By the midpoint of playback, the sound of dragged breaths and stifled reaction filled the room. A journalist near the aisle began typing furiously. Two detectives who'd chased this evidence for months exchanged a look that mixed satisfaction and grief. They'd spent nights doubting if they'd ever see truth land this clearly. Now it was there, in Kevin's own voice, unraveling him second by second. When the screen faded to black, the silence that followed felt heavier than any sound. Kevin stared straight ahead, eyes glassy, lips parted slightly as if searching for a new lie to stand on. Sabrina, shoulders tight, bent her head down, a strand of hair falling across her face. The judge's gavel struck once, echoing across the chamber like the final note of a symphony nobody wanted to hear. For those still doubting Kevin's guilt, the recordings made disbelief impossible. It wasn't rage that killed Lisa, it was design. And in that realization, the audience, who once pitted him, seemed to collectively exhale the truth. As court adjourned for the day, a camera flash caught Sabrina's face as she whispered under her breath. Reporters close enough to hear paused writing, the words too soft for most to notice, but caught just enough by the microphones. He said he loved me. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't justification. It was a statement of what love had cost her, what it had destroyed, and what it had never truly been. Kevin kept his stare locked on her as deputies led him away, his mask now fractured beyond repair. For the first time, the man who once controlled every scene no longer wrote the story. The truth had spoken for him, and it spoke louder than any lie ever could. The following morning, the courthouse was different. The crowd that had filled every seat now sat hushed, subdued, knowing that whatever happened next would close a chapter no sentence could truly balance. Kevin Canfield sat at the defense table, hands folded, his once confident posture replaced by the weight of exposure. The jurors filed in, eyes avoiding him. Sabrina sat a few feet away, her face pale, fingers clinging tightly to a tissue she hadn't used yet. The judge entered, robes rustling softly, setting the tone before a single word was spoken. When the gavel fell for order, the sound was more reverent than sharp, signaling not victory or vengeance but an ending none of them could take pride in. The judge cleared his throat, began speaking in a voice quiet enough that the room had to lean in to hear. There was no anger, no satisfaction, only solemn understanding of how far betrayal could reach when hidden behind affection. He recited Kevin's crimes in sparse, deliberate phrases. Manipulation of a minor, solicitation to commit murder, conspiracy. Each count carried its own silence between the words, a space filled with the ache of Lisa Canfield's name echoing through the courtroom. For a heartbeat, Kevin's composure cracked when the judge said it aloud. Not as wife, not as victim, but as a person forever removed by his control. Lisa Canfield devoted her life to giving children a home, the judge said softly, and you turned that home into her grave. When the verdict was read, the courtroom held still. The foreman's voice trembled slightly as he answered each count. Guilty. Kevin lowered his head but didn't cry. The air inside the chamber pressed down on everyone who had followed the story for years. Even justice in that moment felt too small. The judge continued, voice steady as he issued the sentence. Life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years. He explained that the decision was not made from anger but necessity, that the law's duty was to protect those who couldn't see danger until it was too late. You built your crime with words, the judge said, and you weaponized love itself. No one spoke afterward. The sound of the bailiff's keys was the only movement in the room. Somewhere between closing arguments and the final sentence, a brief tremor ran through Sabrina. She stared forward blankly, then closed her eyes as if whispering a prayer for someone who hadn't been prayed for enough. When asked whether she had anything to say, she simply shook her head. This was not her day to speak. For her, guilt had already entered and settled months ago. She would remain in custody to serve her term under juvenile life rehabilitation. Her future uncertain, her name forever attached to the man who orchestrated her ruin. The court moved through its final motions mechanically, though everyone inside understood that no punishment could ever realign what Kevin Canfield had broken. A few feet away, Lisa's sister stood slowly when given permission for her statement. She was trembling, but her words cut through the silence with a grace that hurt. Lisa believed in second chances, she said softly. She opened her home to people who needed them, but she never got hers. Her voice cracked but didn't falter. Around her, family members nodded quietly, gripping one another's hands as tears slid down faces too tired to hide them. The weight of loss filled the room completely. Not chaos, not anger, just raw absence. An awareness that goodness, no matter how enduring, can be undone by deceit. Later that afternoon, as reporters waited outside for comment. A social worker who had once approved the Canfield's foster license stepped forward, her voice heavy with guilt. "He met every standard we set," she said. "We thought he'd help change lives. But sometimes you can't vet what hides behind charm." Her words became the quiet reflection no one had wanted to hear, that even systems built to save can be fooled by those who know how to mimic empathy. She bowed her head, the cameras catching the moment before she walked away. Inside the courtroom, the judge removed his glasses, rubbed his temples, and gave a final nod to the clerk. Kevin Canfield was led away in cuffs, expression hollow. Sabrina was escorted out through a separate door, eyes lowered, the faint clank of chains marking each step. The room cleared slowly, benches left empty, the echo of the verdict still hanging like smoke after a fire. As the last light from the hallway faded across the courtroom wall, a clerk gathered the exhibits, Lisa's diary among them, placing it carefully into an evidence box labeled closed. The gavel struck one final time, its sound sharp, lingering, cutting through every remaining whisper. Then total silence. After the gavel's echo faded, the courthouse emptied one last time. The jurors filed into the hallways, reporters closed their notebooks, and for the first time in more than 2 years, the room that had carried grief, rage, and revelation returned to stillness. The benches were cleared, dusted, polished back to anonymity, as if the walls themselves were eager to forget what they had heard. Outside, snow drifted lightly across the Lake County Square, covering footsteps of those who had just witnessed a life condemned. Inside correctional facilities miles away, new files were opened, photos taken, fingerprints pressed onto paper. One folder labeled Canfield, Kevin J., slid quietly onto a shelf already heavy with men who once thought they were untouchable. In another facility, a different folder marked Zunich. Sabrina contained the photo of a young woman whose eyes hadn't aged with time but with regret. Detectives revisited the case one final time before closing it for record. Evidence boards came down, boxes sealed with tape, exhibits marked for long-term storage. One investigator paused over the photographs spread across the table. The Canfield living room, the knife on the carpet, the clock on the wall caught in police flash revealing the exact moment their timeline froze. He muttered what every officer who worked the case had privately felt. Every good intention in that house became a weapon. In his voice was neither hatred nor triumph, only the exhaustion of a man who had spent months watching love turn into strategy and innocence turn into currency. He stayed at his desk for a few minutes longer than the others, staring at Lisa's smiling photograph before finally switching off the light. Lisa Canfield's grave rests just 6 miles from the home where she was killed. The first snow of December 2014 settled softly over her headstone, melting where the heat of a small candle still burned. A neighbor had lit it that morning, whispering a quiet prayer before leaving. As the flame flickered in the wind, the faint ticking of a pocket watch could be heard from the man visiting beside her. One of the lead detectives, now older, slower, still haunted by the sound of that clock from the crime scene. He said she reminded him of the type of person who could make a crowded room feel safe, and then, with a broken half-smile, admitted the truth. "We couldn't save her." The candle's flame wavered but did not die. Its light reflected faintly on the engraved words "Forever Loved." Across the city, the Canfield home sat empty, windows sealed, toys still scattered in corners untouched. Prospective buyers toured it once but couldn't shake the feeling that something remained suspended there. A silence too deep to repaint or redecorate away. A realtor later said it always felt cold, even in summer. The clock that had once ticked through every lie was gone, replaced by a blank space on the wall. But in every memory retold, its sound still beat like a second heart in the story. Steady, haunting, impossible to forget. Sabrina Zunich now wakes each morning beneath fluorescent lights, her life measured not by weeks or months but by court-ordered milestones. Prison counselors describe her as introverted but polite, responding to programs and books the same way she once responded to care, hesitant, searching. She speaks of Lisa during sessions, describing her as motherly, kind, undeserving of what happened. When asked about Kevin, her voice drops to a whisper. He made it feel like love. Some days she writes letters she never sends. Other days she simply stares at photos from before it all, before promises became orders. She has said she wants to tell her story one day so others will see the difference between affection and control. But for now, she says, she's still learning it herself. Kevin, hundreds of miles away, moves through the routines of incarceration with mechanical detachment. Guards describe him as quiet, meticulous, rarely speaking beyond necessary words. He registers time not in days but in appeals denied. For a man once obsessed with control, confinement became his punishment's sharpest edge. No more schedules to forge, no one to direct, no lies left to sharpen, just walls and memory. Even among inmates, he carries an air of disbelief, like someone rehearsing the moment when he wakes to find it all a dream. But it isn't. The system he once manipulated now owns every hour he breathes. Back in Lake County, the social workers who placed Sabrina in Lisa's care reevaluated protocols, retrained staff, reviewed every background check. One of them, speaking quietly to reporters years later, summarized the moral weight of the case. Lisa trusted because trust was who she was. We trusted because we wanted to believe that people like the Canfils made the world better. We weren't wrong about Lisa, but we were blind about him. Her voice fractured at the end of that sentence. There was no villain's satisfaction in the outcome, only the ache of hindsight. As the snow thickens outside and all that's left of the story are case files and gravestones, a simple truth remains. No verdict restores the lost. No judgment can rewrite the cost of misguided faith. Justice, as imperfect and human as it is, doesn't balance the scale. It merely steadies it long enough for the rest of us to look. Truth, when it finally arrives, is rarely triumphant. It is quiet. It is incomplete. But it's all we have left when everything else has fallen away. The clock's tick returns faintly one last time. Steady, distant, almost kind, blending into the hush of winter air as the candle beside Lisa's name flickers once, then steadies, burning through the final seconds of light. Years have passed since that night in Willoughby Hills, but the story of Lisa Canfil, Kevin Canfil, and Sabrina Zunich continues to echo beyond the walls of any courtroom. The case has become a reference point inside law schools and psychology departments, dissected not for its shock value but for what it revealed about manipulation and the limits of compassion. Criminologists explain that Kevin Canfil's method of control sits at the dark intersection of trust and dependency, where a young person's need for belonging becomes the instrument of their undoing. Trauma counselors admit that even after years of training, many professionals still miss the red flags until it's too late. One notes, he didn't just isolate Sabrina from her foster mother. He isolated her from reason. Once that line was crossed, logic couldn't bring her back. Child advocacy groups now use the case in prevention programs, teaching workers to look past charm, to listen for patterns of overattachment masked as mentorship. The system learned, but it learned the hardest way possible, through someone's loss. Others who study the case see it through the lens of forgiveness. One counselor reminds audiences that Sabrina Zunich was both victim and perpetrator, molded at an age when love feels absolute and forever. Her faith in Kevin wasn't romance. It was survival, misplaced but sincere. The tragedy remains that every adult meant to guide her instead projected their own hope onto a situation that demanded scrutiny, not sympathy. And Lisa, whose heart never measured risk, bore the cost of that optimism. As one investigative psychologist said during an anniversary broadcast, every broken system has people who mean well. That's what makes it so dangerous. We expect monsters to look like monsters. We forget they usually don't. From those who worked the original investigation, reflection comes with quiet exhaustion. Detectives who once carried those files still admit they can't erase the image of that living room. The dim light, the open clock on the wall, the knife catching that faint flash of red-blue sirens through the window. For them, it was never about catching a criminal. It was about understanding how love could be engineered to kill. Today, they train younger officers differently. Follow emotion, but trust evidence. Because in this case, emotion was the weapon. The world outside has moved forward. The Canfield house eventually sold to new owners who knew nothing of what came before. They repainted the walls, changed the floors, planted bright lilacs by the porch. Yet on cold nights, neighbors still say the wind through those trees sounds heavier there, as if carrying whispers that never completely fade. Truth has no echo chamber. It lingers quietly where we least expect it, reminding every listener that justice, at its best, is imperfect mercy dressed as order. She lied to protect the man who ruined her, and he lied to protect himself. The truth played on a screen and ended both their lives in different ways. Even now, that same footage is used in classes for investigators and counselors, not as spectacle but as instruction. This is how manipulation hides in plain sight, how trust turns fatal when no one wants to see it breaking. Through it all, Lisa Canfield's name remains at the center, not as tragedy personified, but as a reminder of kindness set against cruelty and how even goodness can be weaponized by those who study it well enough. In the end, justice did what it could. Closed files, filled cells, and left silence behind. But no verdict can measure what humanity lost inside that home. Their empathy was twisted, love misused, and faith betrayed. Yet within that destruction, a truth survived, a fragile signal that still warns from the depths of every broken system. It asks us to listen better, look closer, and never confuse charm for character again. The camera fades to an empty house, curtains shifting gently in the winter air. The same clock standing on the wall, its hands unmoving. The second hand lifts once, hesitates, then stops. What began with care ended with control, and what remains now is the lesson. Justice isn't victory. It's memory preserved against forgetting. Every year in the United States, thousands of minors experience grooming relationships that lead to violent outcomes or exploitation. Most begin in places meant to keep them safe.